The first time I saw $20 million worth of mountain homes go completely silent, it was because one woman decided my workshop did not belong in her version of paradise. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I am 58 years old, and for more than 3 decades, I have worked as a master plumber in the mountains of Colorado. I never imagined that a small workshop behind my house, the same place where my father taught me how to build things with my own hand, would become the center of a battle between an old family property and a neighborhood full of people who thought money gave them the right to rewrite history. It started on a cold Tuesday morning in Silver Pine Valley, when I was inside my detached workshop repairing a custom heating system for a local restaurant. The sound of my welding machine was familiar to me, almost comforting, but apparently it was a problem for someone else. At exactly 7:30 a.m., I heard a luxury SUV pull into my driveway. I looked through the window and saw a woman stepping out wearing a designer winter coat, expensive boots, and the kind of expression people wear when they already believe they have won an argument they have not even started. Her name was Victoria Hale, president of the Silver Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. She had moved from Connecticut a few years earlier and quickly became the face of the new development built beside my property. She looked at my workshop, then looked back at me, like she was trying to figure out how something so ordinary could exist next to her million-dollar homes. "You need to understand something," she said without even introducing herself properly. "This area was designed to be a peaceful mountain retreat, not an industrial zone." I wiped my hands, stepped outside, and asked what she meant. She handed me a folder. Inside was a formal notice claiming my workshop was an unauthorized commercial operation. According to her, the equipment, the noise, and the work I performed were damaging the character of the neighborhood. She gave me 60 days to remove my tools and equipment or face daily fines from the HOA. I remember standing there holding that paper, looking past her shoulder at the houses she represented. Those homes had heated driveways, glass walls facing the mountains, outdoor kitchens, and rooms bigger than the entire house my father built. Meanwhile, my workshop was the same wooden building that had been standing there since before most of those houses were even planned. I wanted to get angry. I really did. But my father always told me something when I was young. He said, "When someone is trying to push you around, do not give them your temper, give them patience." So I smiled, thanked her for stopping by, and went back inside. I thought maybe she was just another person who did not understand the history of the land. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the letters started arriving. First came warnings, then violation notices, then emails from attorneys. Every message carried the same attitude, that I was an inconvenience that needed to disappear. Victoria never said it directly, but I could feel what she really believed. My home represented the old Aspen, the version before luxury developments took over, and people like her wanted everything around them to match a certain image. One evening, after another letter arrived threatening legal action, I sat alone in my workshop, looking at my father's old tools hanging on the wall. That was when I realized this was not really about noise. It was about control. They were not trying to solve the problem. They were trying to decide who belonged and who did not. So I opened the old filing cabinet my father left behind, the one filled with decades of property records, building permits, and maps that most people would have thrown away years ago. I had no idea that inside those dusty folders was something that would change the entire fight. Something that would show Victoria Hale and the entire Silver Pine Ridge community that they had been standing on my land for years without ever truly asking permission. I spent the next 3 nights going through every document my father had kept since the 1970s. And if you have ever looked through old property records, you know exactly how exciting that sounds. Which is to say, not exciting at all. Most people would rather watch paint dry, but when your entire home and everything your family built is being threatened, those boring pieces of paper suddenly become the most important things you own. I pulled out survey maps, utility plans, construction records, and handwritten notes my father had made decades earlier. My father was not a lawyer, but he understood land. He built our house with his own hands, and he always believed that a person should know exactly where their property ended and where someone else's began. Around midnight on the 3rd night, I found something I almost missed. It was a utility agreement from 1981 connected to the original development plans for the land next to us. I spread the papers across my workbench and started reading every line carefully. The document showed that when the Silver Pine Ridge development was first planned, the previous owners had allowed a temporary access route across the western edge of our property so the developers could install underground utility lines during construction. That included the main natural gas line that eventually supplied the homes that came after. At first, I thought I had found nothing. Temporary access agreements were common during construction. Developers needed space to bring equipment in, lay pipes, and finish projects. But then I saw the section that made me sit back in my chair. The agreement was not permanent. It required renewal, written approval, formal recording. None of those things had ever happened. The gas line crossing my property, the same line feeding 19 homes in Silver Pine Ridge, was sitting there under an expired temporary easement. I remember staring at the paper for a long time because part of me could not believe it. These people had spent years sending me warnings about rules and regulations, but they had never bothered to check whether their own foundation was built on legal ground. The next morning, I called a property attorney named Marcus Reed, a local guy who had handled land disputes in the valley for years. I did not tell him what I wanted to do. I just asked him to look at the documents. He came by that afternoon, walked the property line, studied the maps, and then sat across from me in my workshop. He tapped the papers with his finger and said, "Ethan, if these records are accurate, they have a bigger problem than your workshop." I asked him what he meant. He looked toward the neighborhood sitting beyond my fence. Their entire gas system depends on access they may no longer legally have. I did not celebrate. I did not want revenge. At least, that is where I told myself at first. The truth was, I was angry. Not because they wanted rules. Rules are important. Communities need standards. I understood that better than most people, but there is a difference between protecting a neighborhood and using power to push someone around. Victoria had walked onto my property and treated me like I was the problem. She had never asked about my family, never asked why the workshop mattered, never cared that I had spent my whole life serving this community. To her, I was just an eyesore, a reminder that the valley existed before her. After confirming everything with Marcus in the county records office, I made my next move carefully. I sent formal notices to the HOA board, the homeowners, and the gas utility company explaining that the temporary easement had expired and that continued use of my property would require a legal agreement. I gave them time to respond. I did not sneak around. I did not damage anything. I followed every step exactly the way the law required. I thought maybe they would finally sit down and talk. I was wrong. 2 days later, Victoria's attorney called me. His voice was calm, but the message was obvious. He believed I was bluffing. "Mr. Caldwell, interfering with utility service is a serious matter," he said. I looked at the stack of documents sitting in front of me and answered, "I agree. That is why I made sure everything was done properly." There was a pause on the other end. Then he asked me to send copies of the easement records. I did. A few hours later, I received another call. This time, it was shorter. The confidence was gone. "We will review this with the association," he said. That was the moment I knew they had finally realized this was not another HOA complaint they could push through. This was about property rights. For the first time since Victoria showed up at my workshop, I felt like I was not fighting alone. But what happened next changed everything. Because while the HOA lawyers were reviewing documents, the weather forecast was turning brutal. A major cold front was moving into Colorado, and temperatures were expected to drop below freezing for several days. I knew exactly what that meant. The gas line running through my property was not just supplying fireplaces. It was connected to the radiant heating systems those luxury homes depended on, the kind of systems designed for comfort, not survival. And as the temperature continued to fall, the deadline I had given them was getting closer. 10 days after my notice was sent, I stood outside my workshop before sunrise, looking at the same neighborhood that had spent weeks trying to force me to change my life. The mountains were covered in snow. The air was still. And for the first time in months, I was not wondering what they were going to do to me. I was wondering what they would do when they realized I was done backing down. The morning everything changed was colder than anyone expected. The temperature dropped to 12 degrees. The kind of cold where the air feels heavy and every sound seems quieter than normal. The mountains around Silver Pine Valley were covered in fresh snow, and for a moment everything looked peaceful. But inside those 19 luxury homes, people were waking up to a problem they never thought they would face. No heat, no warm floors, no comfortable mountain retreat, just cold rooms and unanswered questions. At 5 in the morning, I walked the western edge of my property with my coat pulled tight, holding the same documents that had been sitting in my father's filing cabinet for decades. I want people to understand something about that morning. I was not standing there with a smile because I wanted people to suffer. I was not celebrating families being uncomfortable. That was never the point. The point was that, for years, people had walked across my property, used my land, and treated me like I was the one causing trouble. They had demanded respect for their rules while ignoring the basic respect they owed me as a property owner. There's a big difference between wanting peace and demanding control. I had spent weeks trying to solve the problem quietly. I sent notices. I provided documents. I gave them opportunities to negotiate. But every time they responded, they acted like I was the obstacle. Now, for the first time, they had to deal with the consequences of ignoring a problem they created themselves. The gas company arrived shortly after sunrise. They checked the paperwork, reviewed the easement history, and confirmed what my attorney had already told me. The temporary access agreement was no longer valid. Without a permanent agreement, they could not continue using my land indefinitely. The line was shut down until both sides reached a legal arrangement, and then the waiting began. At first, many residents thought the issue would be resolved within an hour. They assumed someone would call, someone would threaten legal action, and somehow the situation would disappear like every other HOA dispute. But this was different. This was not about a broken rule in a neighborhood handbook. This was about a piece of property and a legal agreement that had never been completed. By 9 in the morning, the first messages started spreading through the community. The radiant floors were getting cold. The heated driveways stopped melting snow. The automatic systems that people depended on suddenly became useless. The homes were beautiful, but beauty does not keep a house warm when the power behind it is gone. By the afternoon, the HOA emergency meeting was filled with frustration. Some homeowners were angry at me. Others were angry at Victoria. A few were simply confused because they had never known the gas line crossed private land. One man actually told the board, "How did nobody know this?" And that was the question everyone was asking. How did a neighborhood full of lawyers, executives, and professionals never verify the most important utility agreement connected to their homes? The answer was simple. Nobody looked because nobody expected to need to. They assumed the system worked because it had always worked. Meanwhile, the person they considered the problem had spent his entire life paying attention to details. As a plumber, I learned something early. Small mistakes in a system do not always cause problems immediately. Sometimes they sit quietly for years until one day everything stops working. That was exactly what happened here. The HOA had built a luxury community on top of a forgotten mistake. And now that mistake had a name, a document, and a deadline. Over the next few days, the pressure increased. Temporary heaters were brought in. Families booked hotel rooms. Maintenance crews rushed around trying to prevent more damage. One homeowner, the Hamilton family, suffered a major pipe failure that caused tens of thousands of dollars in repairs. Suddenly, the same people who had complained about my workshop being a disturbance were calling my phone asking if I could help fix their problems. I remember looking at the messages and thinking about how strange life can be. A month earlier, they wanted me gone. Now, they needed the exact skills they tried to push away. But I did not ignore them because I wanted revenge. I had spent my whole career fixing problems, not creating them. The difference was, this time I needed them to understand that respect had to go both ways. On the fourth day, Victoria came back to my property. The woman who had arrived weeks earlier with confidence and authority now stood at my workshop door looking exhausted. She was wearing a simple winter jacket, no designer image, no carefully prepared speech, no team of people standing behind her. Just her. "Ethan, we need to find a solution," she said. I looked at her for a moment and then invited her inside. For the first time, she actually saw the workshop, not the noise, not the equipment, the history. She saw my father's old workbench. She saw the photographs on the wall. She saw the handwritten notes from decades of repairs. She saw that this place was not some random business someone built to annoy her neighborhood. It was a piece of a family's life. I placed the agreement on the table, the same agreement I had wanted from the beginning. A permanent easement, fair payment for the use of my land, clear maintenance responsibilities, written recognition that my workshop was legal and protected. No more assumptions, no more threats, no more one-sided demands. Victoria read every page carefully. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she looked up and asked, "You really could have done this from the beginning?" I nodded. "Yes, I just needed someone to treat me like a neighbor instead of a violation notice." That sentence seemed to hit harder than any legal argument could have, because deep down, that was the real conflict. It was never only about gas. It was never only about a workshop. It was about whether people with more money and influence could decide who belonged in a place they arrived at after someone else had already built a life there. The agreement went before the homeowners. Some were still upset. Some felt embarrassed. Some admitted they never understood the situation. But eventually, all 19 households signed. The gas was restored. The houses warmed up again. The emergency ended. But the relationship between the old property and the new development was permanently changed. After that day, nobody called my workshop an industrial nuisance anymore. People started stopping by to say hello. Some apologized. Some admitted they had judged me before knowing my story. A few even hired me to repair their heating systems because they finally understood something simple. The person they wanted removed was the person who understood their homes better than anyone else. Years later, my workshop still runs. The machines still make noise. The welding sparks still light up the room. And sometimes I still laugh when I think about how a few pieces of old paperwork changed everything. Because in the end, the most powerful thing I had was not a threat, not anger, and not revenge. It was proof. Proof that land has a history. Proof that agreements matter. Proof that no matter how expensive a house is, the ground underneath it still belongs to someone. But I know people will still debate what happened. Some will say I was completely justified because I defended my property and followed the law. Others will argue that turning off heat during a Colorado winter crossed a moral line. Maybe both sides have a point. The law can tell you what you can do, but people will always debate what you should do. And that is why I want to hear your opinion. If you were in my position, would you have taken the same steps? Or would you have found another way to handle it? Was I protecting my rights? Or did the situation go too far? Tell me what you think in the comments, because these conflicts are never just about fences, buildings, or utility lines. They are about respect, responsibility, and how people treat each other when power is involved. If you enjoy stories about ordinary people facing impossible situations and standing up when they are pushed too far, make sure to subscribe, share the story, and let me know what you would have done if you were standing at that property line with the whole neighborhood watching.